History is a story told by the victors. Its grand narrative is carved into the monuments of pharaohs, inked onto the scrolls of Caesars, and fired into the clay tablets of kings. We know their names: Egypt, Rome, Babylon, Greece. Civilizations that built our world, whose legacies surround us in our laws, our language, our architecture. But what of the stories that are lost? What of the empires that were not simply conquered, but erased? Imagine a superpower, a civilization as mighty as any in the ancient world, appear to the great an empire that dominated a vast territory for 5 centuries, commanded immense armies, and pioneered technologies that would define an age. Now, imagine it vanishing. Not just collapsing, but disappearing so completely from human memory that for 3,000 years it was as if it had never been. This is not a myth. This is the story of the Hittites. A ghost empire whose silence is one of history's most profound mysteries. Their world was the Bronze Age, a time of legendary kings and epic conflicts, an era when gods were thought to walk among mortals. The great powers of the day were clustered around the fertile river valleys of the Nile and the Tigris-Euphrates. Egypt and Mesopotamia were the ancient, established centers of power, their histories already stretching back a millennium. But to the north, in the heart of what is now modern Turkey, lay a rugged, formidable land, Anatolia. A high, arid plateau ringed by mountains, rich in timber, stone, and, most importantly, metal. This was a crucible of nations, a land that bred tough, resilient people. And it was here they called themselves the people of the land of Hatti. We call them the Hittites. From their mountain-girt capital of Hattusa, a fortress city built amongst dramatic rock outcrops, it was a complex feudal society, a patchwork of vassal kingdoms bound by intricate treaties. This structure gave them a unique resilience. So, while other empires were monolithic, brittle, and prone to shattering, the Hittite state could bend. They were organized, they were ambitious, and they were armed with a technological advantage that would soon allow them to challenge the old world order. Warfare in the Bronze Age was dominated by a single revolutionary weapon system, the chariot. For the Egyptians, the chariot was a light, 2-man platform, a driver and an archer. It was a mobile missile launcher designed for speed, for hit-and-run tactics, for harassing an enemy from a distance. It was fast, elegant, and deadly. The Hittites saw this technology and transformed it. They engineered a new kind of war machine. Their chariot was heavier, built with the axle moved to the middle of the platform for greater stability. And crucially, it carried a crew of 3, a driver, a warrior, and a third man, a spearman who could also carry a large shield. This was not a subtle innovation. It was a revolution in military doctrine. The Hittite 3-man chariot was not a skirmishing vehicle. It was the world's first armored fighting vehicle, a Bronze Age battle tank. It could charge directly into enemy infantry formations, its spearmen and warrior creating a zone of death around them. What it sacrificed in speed, it more than made up for in shock power and durability. This single invention, changed the calculus of power across the Near East. But the Hittites held another secret, a technology far rarer and more valuable than bronze. In the mountains of Anatolia, they were among the first people in the world to master the complex art of smelting iron. In an age of bronze, iron was a substance of near mythical status. It was difficult to work, requiring higher temperatures and specialized knowledge. An iron dagger was a gift for a king, more precious than gold, a symbol of immense power and prestige. While their armies were still overwhelmingly equipped with bronze, the Hittites' monopoly on ironworking knowledge, they were the masters of metal, the innovators of their age. Armed with their revolutionary chariots and their command of new technologies, the Hittites exploded onto the world stage. They pushed south from their Anatolian heartland, conquering the kingdoms of northern Syria, pushing ever closer to the sphere of Egyptian influence. But their ambition was not limited to their immediate neighbors. In 1595 BC, the Hittite great king, he gathered his army and marched not west or south, but east, on a campaign of breathtaking audacity. His target was the grandest, most ancient, and most sacred city in the world, Babylon. The journey was a 1,000-mile epic, an invasion across hostile territory that no one thought possible. The city of Hammurabi, the jewel of Mesopotamia, a beacon of civilization for centuries, was considered impregnable, eternal. Mursili's army fell upon it like a thunderbolt. They breached the legendary walls, plundered its temples, and toppled the great Amorite dynasty that had ruled for 300 years. They did not stay to occupy it. That was not the point. The point was to make a statement. The sack of Babylon was an act of geopolitical terror that sent shockwaves from the Persian Gulf to the Nile Delta. A new superpower had arrived. The old world was gone. A new, more dangerous age had begun, an age that would be the century and a half following the sack of Babylon, saw the political map of the ancient Near East redrawn. The old powers of Mesopotamia were shattered, leaving a power vacuum. Into this void stepped the two remaining titans. In the south, the new kingdom of Egypt, at the absolute zenith of its wealth and imperial power. In the north, the Hittite Empire, consolidating its control over Anatolia and Syria. A cold war descended upon the region, a long, simmering conflict fought through proxy wars, espionage, and diplomacy. The prize was control of the Levant, the land bridge that connected Africa and Asia. For generations, this land had been the jewel in Egypt's imperial crown. The Hittites now laid claim to it. Conflict was inevitable. And the coming clash would be embodied by two of the most powerful rulers in the ancient world. In Egypt, the young, ambitious, and supremely confident pharaoh, Ramesses II. Ramesses was no mere king. He was a living god, the beloved son of Amun-Ra. He ascended to the throne with a singular obsession, to restore Egypt's glory, to crush the Hittites. His vast kingdom gave him access to almost limitless resources, Nubian gold, a massive population of soldiers. He was determined to etch his name into eternity. His rival in the north was the Hittite great king, Muwatalli II. Where Rameses was flamboyant and divine, Muwatalli was a shrewd, pragmatic, and patient strategist. He was no god-king, but the first among equals in a warrior aristocracy. He understood the terrain, he understood his enemy, and he had been preparing for this confrontation his entire life. Turning. The flashpoint was a city that had become a symbol of their rivalry. Kadesh, strategically located. For Rameses to reconquer Syria, he had to take Kadesh. For Muwatalli, Kadesh had to be held at all costs. In the spring of 1274 BC, the two greatest armies the world had ever seen began to move. From his new capital of Pyrameses in the Nile Delta, the pharaoh mustered his forces, or divisions of 20,000 men each, named for the great gods of Egypt, Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Set. It was a colossal expeditionary force, a river of men and horses flowing north into Canaan. Rameses himself rode at the head of the Amun division, his golden chariot gleaming, his divine authority absolute. At the same time, Muwatalli called upon his vassals. From across his vast empire, a multi-ethnic, multilingual army converged on Syria. 16 allied kingdoms answered the call, sending their elite troops and chariot squadrons to join the Hittite regulars. Muwatalli had secretly amassed a force that rivaled, and perhaps even outnumbered the Egyptians. And he had a plan. He would not wait for Rameses to besiege Kadesh. He would choose the field of battle, and he would spring a trap. After a month of marching, Rameses and the lead Amun division arrived south of Kadesh. His army was dangerously spread out, with the other divisions still a day's march behind. It was here that Hittite intelligence played its masterstroke. 2 local nomads were brought before the pharaoh. They claimed to be deserters, and they told Rameses exactly what he wanted to hear: that the Hittite army was terrified of the approaching Egyptians and had retreated more than 100 miles to the north. For Rameses, a ruler who believed in his own divinity, the news confirmed his sense of destiny. "My pharaoh, we must consider the risk," the scouts report. His arrogance overrode his caution. Believing the path was clear, he ordered the Amun division to press on, to set up camp just northwest of Kadesh. He had fallen for the deception. Hook, line, and sinker. For on the other side of the city of Kadesh, hidden from view, Muwatalli's entire army lay in wait. Over 40,000 infantry and, most critically, 2,500 of the feared 3-man Hittite chariots coiled like a spring. As Rameses set up his camp, confident and exposed, the trap was sprung. The entire Hittite chariot corps thundered out from behind the city, forded the Orontes River, and smashed with terrifying. The impact was catastrophic. The Egyptian lines, caught completely by surprise, simply disintegrated. The heavy Hittite chariots plowed through the ranks, a storm of bronze and iron, leaving a trail of chaos and death. Survivors, panicked and broken, fled north towards Rameses' camp, with the Hittite war machine in hot pursuit. The alarm was raised in the pharaoh's camp just moments before the Hittite tide crashed into it. What had been an orderly military encampment dissolved into sheer panic. Charioteers scrambled for their vehicles, infantrymen were cut down where they stood. The pharaoh's elite bodyguard formed a desperate ring around him. Rameses, the living god, was suddenly facing his own mortality. He was surrounded, his army shattered, his escape cut off. For a moment, It seemed the greatest empire on earth was about to lose its king, its army, and its future. In his own later accounts, which he would carve on temple walls across Egypt, Rameses claimed this was his finest hour. Abandoned and alone, he said he prayed to his father, the god Amun, who heard him and filled him with supernatural strength. He single-handedly charged the Hittite line 6 times, cutting his way through his enemies, a divine whirlwind of destruction. The reality was likely more desperate and less solitary. He and his small contingent of elite guards fought with the courage of despair, holding their ground against overwhelming odds. The Hittite charioteers who had broken formation to begin looting the rich Egyptian camp suddenly found themselves facing a determined. It was the largest chariot battle ever fought in human history. That discipline faltered. A monumental clash of empires involving perhaps 50,000 soldiers and 5,000 chariots. And it had ended in a bloody draw. Rameses to Egypt, where he's retreated to Egypt, where he would spend the rest of his long reign proclaiming the Battle of Kadesh as his single greatest victory. His temples depict him as a lone hero, single-handedly vanquishing the Hittite hordes. But back in Hattusa, the Hittite annals recorded a different story. A strategic victory in which the Egyptian invasion was decisively repelled and Hittite control over Syria was secured. 2 superpowers, 2 kings, 2 completely different versions of the same event. This brutal, inconclusive clash had proven one terrifying truth to both sides. They were too evenly matched. Neither could decisively defeat the other without risking their own annihilation. The Great War for control of the world had ended not with a clear victor, but with a new and dangerous understanding. The age of epic conquest was over. Something new would have to take its place. What follows a battle that nobody can truly win? A fragile equilibrium, maintained by 2 exhausted giants. For years after Kadesh, the border between the Egyptian and Hittite spheres of influence remained a simmering flashpoint. Skirmishes continued, proxies were armed, and spies from both sides whispered in the courts of Syrian city-states. The war had not truly ended. It had simply entered a colder, more protracted phase. The world held its breath, waiting for the second, decisive round. But it never came. Instead, the catalyst for change came not from the battlefield, but from within the very halls of the Hittite palace at Hattusa. Muwatalli II, the king who had faced Rameses at Kadesh, died. He was succeeded by his young son, Warhiteshub, who took the throne name Morsili III. But waiting in the wings was a figure of immense power and ambition, Muwatalli's own brother, Hattusili, a renowned general, a skilled administrator, and the high priest of the storm god of Nerik. Hattusili was a man who believed he, not his young and inexperienced nephew, was destined to rule. The tension was palpable. For 7 years, Urashub struggled to assert his authority over his powerful uncle, attempting to strip him of his titles and territories. It was a fatal miscalculation. Hattusili, citing the god's displeasure with the young king and claiming the throne was his by right, marched on the capital. The coup was swift, and decisive. Oriteshub was deposed and exiled, and his uncle became Hattusili III, great king of Hatti. But a throne seized by force is an unstable one. Hattusili needed to legitimize his rule, both at home and abroad. He needed to be seen not as a usurper, but as a restorer of order, a king of peace and prosperity. Across the sea, in Egypt, Ramesses the Great was facing his own challenges. Despite his monumental campaign of propaganda, carving his victory at Kadesh on every temple wall, the pharaoh knew the truth. The northern frontier remained a costly, unresolved problem. Furthermore, a new, menacing power was rising in the east, Assyria. The Assyrians were beginning to press on the borders of the Hittite vassal state of Mitanni, threatening the entire balance of power in the Near East. A continued war would only weaken them both, leaving them vulnerable to this aggressive new player. And so, in the 21st year of Ramesses' reign, around 1259 BC, something unprecedented occurred. Hittite diplomats arrived in the Egyptian capital of Pyramesses, not with demands for tribute or threats of war, but with an offering of peace. For months, envoys traveled back and forth along the dusty roads of the Levant, carrying drafts and counter-proposals. The negotiations were painstaking, conducted in Akkadian, the international language of the day. A master copy was engraved on a solid tablet of silver and presented to the pharaoh. This was no mere ceasefire. It was the world's first known comprehensive peace treaty, a radical document for its time. Known today as the Treaty of Kadesh or the Eternal Treaty, its text reveals a stunningly modern approach to international relations. It began with a declaration that the state of war was over. There shall be no hostilities between them. The great king, the king of the Hittite, shall not pass over into the land of Egypt. The great king, the king of Egypt, shall not pass over into the land of Hatti to take anything therefrom forever. It was a pact of non-aggression, a formal recognition of each other's borders and sphere of influence. But it went further. It was also a defensive alliance. If either Hatti or Egypt were attacked by a third party or faced an internal rebellion, the other was bound by treaty. This was a direct response to the looming threat of Assyria and the ever-present danger of internal revolt. Finally, it included a detailed extradition clause. Political refugees and fugitives from one land who fled to the other were to be returned. But in a remarkable touch of humanitarian concern, the treaty specified that these returned individuals were not to be punished. Their crime shall not be raised against him. His house, his wives, his children shall not be destroyed. This was a peace treaty between equals. The text is carefully balanced, with each king referred to as Great King, a brother to the other. When Ramesses had the treaty inscribed in hieroglyphs on the walls of the Karnak and Ramessium temples, he presented it as an act. But the cuneiform copy of the treaty, discovered in the ruins of the Hittite archives at Hattusa, tells the true story. It was a mutual agreement born of necessity, a shared realization that cooperation was more profitable than endless conflict. The age of superpowers trying to dominate the world through sheer force was giving way to an age of diplomacy. The Treaty of Kadesh was its founding document, the cornerstone of a new world order. The silver tablet itself is lost to time, but its legacy is profound. A giant replica of the clay tablet from Hattusa now hangs in the United Nations headquarters in New York, a testament a testament to the enduring human quest for peace, a 3,200-year-old reminder that with the treaty signed, the relationship between the two empires transformed. The hostility that had defined them for generations was replaced by a flurry of diplomatic activity. A veritable superhighway of communication opened up between Hattusa and Pyrameses. Messengers, merchants, and ambassadors now traveled the same roads once trod by soldiers. They carried not weapons, but lavish gifts and meticulously crafted letters written on clay tablets. This was the great powers club of the late Bronze Age in full swing, an interconnected world of kingdoms. The correspondence between the two royal courts reveals a surprising intimacy. Hattusili III and Rameses II, these two aging warrior kings, addressed each other as brother. They inquired after each other's health, exchanged court physicians, and debated the nuances of international policy. The Hittite queen, the shrewd and influential Pudu-Hepa, also played a central role. She corresponded directly with Rameses and with his great royal wife Nefertari, addressing them as sister and brother. These were not just formalities. This was the careful, personal construction of a lasting peace. Pudu-Hepa, a former priestess who married Hattusili before his coup, was a political force in her own right, her seal appearing alongside her husband's on state documents, a clear sign of her power and importance. 13 years after the treaty was signed, this new relationship reached its zenith. To seal the alliance in a way no treaty ever could, Hattusili made a dramatic offer, the hand of his eldest daughter. This was more than just a political arrangement. It was a deeply symbolic act. For the Hittites, who often received foreign princesses but rarely sent their own abroad, this was a major concession. For Rameses, now in his mid-50s and with a harem full of wives, it was the ultimate diplomatic prize. The preparations were immense. A vast dowry was assembled, a treasure trove of gold, silver. The princess, whose name is not recorded in Hittite records but was given the Egyptian name Ma-for, she traveled in a grand procession, escorted by a huge contingent of Hittite soldiers and officials. Rameses sent his own armies and officials to meet them, to ensure their safe passage through Egyptian territory. The journey itself was a spectacle of the new peace, with former enemies now acting as honor gods. When the Hittite princess finally arrived in Egypt, the celebration was unlike anything the kingdom had ever seen. The union of the daughter of Hatti and the pharaoh of Egypt was hailed as a divine event, a healing of the world. Inscriptions from the time declare that the gods themselves had brought the two lands together, mingling them as one. The marriage was a resounding success. Ma-for became one of Ramesses' royal wives, and the friend Hattusili even traveled to Egypt for a state visit, a previously unthinkable event. The two great kings who had once sought to destroy each other on the battlefield of Kadesh now stood together. For a few brief, shining decades, the Hittite Empire stood at the absolute pinnacle of its power and influence. It was not a master of the world, but a co-architect, a senior partner in a stable, prosperous, and interconnected international system. They were the equals of Egypt, the arbiters of the Near East, a civilization at its peak. But empires, like all living things, contain the seeds of their own destruction. The golden age of Hittite diplomacy, presided over by Hattusili and Pudu-Hepa, masked deep-seated structural weaknesses. With most significant was the problem of succession. The Hittite monarchy was never as stable as that of Egypt. While primogeniture, the right of the firstborn son, was the ideal, it was frequently challenged. Every time a king died, the empire held its breath, bracing for a potential civil war. Another growing problem was the economy. The Hittite heartland in central Anatolia was not a breadbasket like the Nile Valley. It was highland terrain, prone to unpredictable weather and drought. The entire Hittite state was a highly centralized, redistributive economy, with the palace and temples controlling vast tracts of land. This system worked well in times of plenty, but it was dangerously brittle. A few bad harvests in a row. Clay tablets from the royal archives begin to speak with increasing frequency of grain shortages. We read of urgent requests and missions sent to purchase grain from their vassals in Syria. In a remarkable testament to the strength of the peace treaty, one of the greatest powers on earth found itself dependent on its former enemy. Betas record desperate pleas from the Hittite court to the pharaoh Merneptah, Ramesses II's successor, for emergency shipment. To the west, a collection of small kingdoms in the region of Arzawa were a source of constant intrigue. Often backed by a powerful and mysterious kingdom across the sea known as Ahiawa, which many letters speak of Hittite kings complaining to the king of Ahiawa about his support for these rebels. But the most ominous threat was solidifying in the east. Assyria, once a vassal of the Mitanni kingdom, which was in turn a Hittite vassal, had thrown off its shackles and was impotent. Under aggressive kings like Shalmaneser I and Tukulti-Ninurta I, Assyria crushed the remains. The buffer state that had separated the two great powers was gone. Now, Hittite and Assyria shared a border, and the Assyrians had no interest in the polite diplomatic language of the Great Powers Club. They understood only conquest. The Hittites now faced a formidable enemy on their eastern flank, forcing them to fight a two-front war, diverting the grand, stable system established by the Treaty of Kadesh was beginning to crumble. Then, around the year 1200 BC, a new and terrifying force entered this already volatile world. From the north and the west, from across the sea and down from the Balkans, a great wave of disruption began to roll across the eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian records call them the peoples of the sea. This was not a single nation or a unified army. It was a loose confederation of displaced peoples, perhaps widespread famine, climate change, or the collapse of other political centers. The names recorded by the Egyptians are tantalizing and mysterious. The Peliset, who would become the Philistines. They moved with their families, in ox carts and on ships, seeking new lands to settle, and they cut us. The sophisticated, palace-based economies of the late Bronze Age were utterly unprepared for this kind of threat. Their armies were designed for set-piece battles between state powers, chariots against chariots on open plains. They were not equipped to handle swarms of mobile, desperate raiders who fought with a new type of long sword and a different, more fluid style of warfare. The Sea Peoples were a systemic shock, a force of chaos that the old order could not contain. The first great civilization to fall was the Hittites' western rival, Mycenaean Greece. One by one, their mighty citadels, Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, were violently destroyed and abandoned. The intricate world of the Homeric heroes vanished in fire and ruin. This collapse sent shockwaves eastward, likely adding even more refugees and raiders to the migratory storm. The wave then broke upon the shores of Anatolia. The kingdoms of the west, the old Hittite adversaries in Arzawa, were swept away. The chaos moved inland, towards the Hittite heartland. We have a few chilling snapshots of the final days, preserved in the last clay tablets. From the great port city of Ugarit, a key Hittite vassal state on the Syrian coast, the king, my father, behold, the enemy's ships came, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. The country is abandoned to itself, may my father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us. The reply, found in the ruins of Ugarit, arrived too late. The king of Alashia could only offer words of advice on how to defend the city. By the time the tablet was read, if it ever was, Ugarit was already a smoking ruin. The Hittite Empire, beset by famine, internal division and attacks from the Casca and Assyrians, the last great king of Hatti, a man grimly named Supiluma II, tried to mount a defense. He records a naval victory against ships from Cyprus, the first ever recorded naval battle in Hittite history. It was a valiant effort, a sign that the empire did not simply fade away but fought to the very end. But it was not enough. The tide was overwhelming. The final blow came swiftly and with shocking finality. Towards around 1178 BC, the great capital, Hattusa, the city of 1,000 gods, was attacked. The archaeological evidence is stark and unambiguous. A massive destruction layer covers the entire city. The great temples were looted, the Cyclopean walls were breached, and the royal citadel was burned to the ground. In the royal archives, thousands of clay tablets, the entire administrative and diplomatic the scribes were either killed or fled, their pens silenced forever, and then nothing. The site was abandoned. For centuries, no one lived among the ruins of the mighty capital. The Hittite Empire. There was no slow decline, no lingering rump state in the homeland. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories of history, progress, and power.